Hello, I'm Andy Agathangelo. I'm carrying out this video interview of Mark Learmont in my capacity as Chair of the Secretariat Committee to the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Personal Banking and Fairer Financial Services. I am, however, also the founder of the Transparency Task Force, which provides the Secretariat to the All-Party Parliamentary Group. Mark, thank you very much for having this conversation with me.
My great pleasure.
As you know, it's being video recorded. The video recording will be placed on the APPG's website and will raise awareness of it through social media and so on. You're carrying out this conversation with me, Mark, on the basis that you have already provided a written submission to the APPG's Call for Evidence about the Financial Conduct Authority. Could I invite you, please, first of all, Mark, to tell us about yourself and outline, just briefly to begin with, how you came to interact with the Financial Conduct Authority. Thank you.
Certainly, thanks for that, Andy. My involvement in financial services began when I left the Army in 1987, and I joined what then was almost a recruiting office for the armed forces, and that was a national brokerage called Towery Law, based in Windsor. I worked in their Leeds office for 8.5 years, decided when they went public that I didn't want to be part of the company, and became a partner in a regional IFA firm in Bradford. I was a partner there for 13 years and then decided that at that point I would set up on my own. And so for the last 10 years, that's exactly what I've done. I've been running my own company, and I sold it last year to younger and fitter owners. But I continue to work for 4 days a week, simply because I thoroughly enjoy what I do. How did I get involved with the FCA? It all started, of course, with the Connaught Income Fund and other useless investments that were prevalent at that time, the majority of which all seem to have gone south in one way or another. I was particularly incensed with the Connaught Fund, and at a meeting of all IFAs and interested clients that was held at the National Motorcycle Museum in Birmingham in 2012, I met other like-minded IFAs, and particularly a guy called John Rabbit-Servo, and I joined his group to help. He had a man who was basically doing a lot of the admin work, but he left, and John then asked me if I would step in as the co-chair of CIRAG, which was the Connaught Action Group, in order to help drive this along. I was very much involved with getting the MPs on board, particularly an MP called Gitto Bebb, who was very instrumental and an outstanding chairman of our APPG, and he managed to get various debates in the Westminster Hall and in the House of Commons, particularly on the Connaught affair. I was heavily involved in 2016 onwards with going with John to meet Mark Stewart, the Director of Enforcement at the FCA. I had the pleasure of meeting him 3 times, once at an APPG meeting, twice in his office, and since I sent him an email that he didn't like, he refuses to continue to talk to me. So that's where we're at. I am very keen to make sure that the regulators that we have are brought to book, basically.
Thank you, Mark. And could you just elaborate on what's happened in your view in relation to the Connaught situation? So please just briefly describe the interactions you've personally had with the FCA beyond what you've already explained so far?
The interactions that I've had were based on the fact that right from the outset, to my mind, the whole debacle came down to the fact that the regulators simply were taking a stance which was completely and utterly wrong in my view. I had, as I say, the pleasure of meeting Miss Wayman, who was the chair of the FOS at the time, and that particular conversation simply left myself, fellow members of my committee, and the MP completely and utterly dumbstruck with what she was saying. I can give you an example of that if you like. We had a meeting in Parliament in a committee room 2015 in which Mr. Bebb MP had requested her presence to brief us on where she felt that the Connaught Fund was placed and where it was going. I asked her a question, and the question was very simple. I said, Miss Wayman, can you explain to me why, as an IFA, if I follow the guidelines set out by the FCA, to the letter, you can then find not just one, but every single complaint that has been put to your organisation, how you found in favour of the clients and against the IFAs. Her response was remarkable in so much as she said to all of us, Mr. Learmont, I do not have to take any notice of any guidelines by the FCA. I am entirely able to make up my own mind on anything. And as such, it is my view that these UCITS funds should never have been sold to retail clients. And on that basis, I will find, and my organisation, against any IFA. Well, I can tell you that our chins dropped onto our chests at that. I mean, how she could turn around and say that was to us quite staggering. It was from that day onwards, basically, that I really started to use the old army adage, go to war, because I just felt that it was so incredibly one-sided. You know, I pointed out to her that she was judge, jury, and executioner, that we had no response to that. We weren't allowed to challenge her or her organisation. And so when I then saw the Channel 4 dispatches programme on her organisation, I became even more incensed. So basically, the whole if you like, disaster continued from that date. Myself and John Rabbit-Zerbo and a guy called Gary Heath, who was head of Libertatum at the time and was working as the secretariat for our APPG, went to see Mr. Stewart at Canary Wharf, as they were then. It turned out that when I asked him a question and I said, Mr. Stewart, can you explain to me why you have not taken any evidence from any IFA? And furthermore, you have not taken the evidence from George Patelis, who was the CEO of Toyota, who was making a Principle 11 statement to the FCA, and yet you have deemed him to be a whistleblower, and you haven't taken his evidence. To which I was told, oh, most certainly we have got his evidence. And I said, you haven't. I spoke to him this morning and it's sat in his cupboard in his flat 3 miles from here still. So you never took a single thing, and you certainly never asked any IFA for any evidence on this. And as a result of that meeting, John Ravitch provided a further set of documents, which I am convinced then led to the FCA coming up with the restitution order against Capita. But that's only half of the problem.
In broad terms, what have your dealings with the FCA been like?
Frankly, appalling. When I first met Mr. Stewart, it was in a committee room in Westminster in the House of Parliament, where he was summoned by the then chair of our APPG, Kirsten Oswald of the SNP, and he turned up. He said, I've only got an hour, I've got to go and pick my kids up, and I don't like being in front of a kangaroo court. And I thought, well, if that's the way that you treat being in a committee room in the House of Parliament, then frankly, you and I are not going to see eye to eye. I then, following the second meeting I had with him and John Ravitch, wrote him an email, because I had been in correspondence with him quite often, and I was asking some very specific questions in it with regard to the remuneration that had been paid out to everybody other than the IFAs. His response, sadly, was, you are wrong in everything you suggested, and you're rude, and I'm not going to bother talking to you. And that was the last that I have, last interaction that I've had with them.
Have you ever witnessed any actions or conduct that, in your reasonable belief, breached any law, regulatory code, or applicable or relevant policy? And if so, please explain which law, code, or policy you believe was breached.
Whether it can be put as law, I don't know, but in agreement, the agreement to pay out from the compensation fund that was arranged with Capita did breach the understanding that every IFA had, and which every client had, with regard to the fact that these IFAs, and there are, to my knowledge, 7 firms who are owed in excess of £1 million from this, and yet have been particularly excluded by the FCA from payment. Now, whether that's a breach of human rights, whether it's a breach of whatever, it's an absolute breach of what was stated in the directives from the Financial Ombudsman Service. And you cannot hide behind the fact that these aren't two organizations who are inextricably linked. I am led to understand that there are emails that show the fact that the FCA and FOS were talking to each other on this particular subject.
Have you ever experienced situations where interacting with the FCA has been helpful to either yourself or others? If so, please explain what made the interactions helpful.
None have been helpful. As I said, everything has been a battle from the outset, and it's one that continues.
What are your thoughts, please, Mark, on whether the FCA lacks the powers that it needs, or conversely, that it doesn't make good use of the powers that it already has?
Oh, wow. My simple view is that I don't think that the FCA are fit for purpose. I believe that they have had in their existence a series of very serious events that they have been unable to give the proper and right guidance, that they concentrate on minutiae and don't concentrate on the very major problems that we have and have had over the past 20 years. I find that I am expected to respond as to anything that comes out of Endeavour Square, and I usually have 2 weeks to do it in. If I want to get something done with the other way around, as we found with Connaught, we're still talking about it 9 years later. They are not experts in their own field, and that goes with all of the regulatory bodies, and was once again graphically shown in that Channel 4 Dispatches program, where the hidden camera had actually recorded somebody saying, I work in the investment side of this. He said, I've been here 2 years. He said, I don't know what I'm talking about half the time, and I've got to Google what it is that I'm meant to be talking about. Well, how can we, as an industry who are regulated to the nth degree anyway, have any confidence in our regulators if that is the attitude that these principally civil servants have?
Have you experienced any difficulties or shortcomings in your interactions with the FCA?
Yes, the difficulties are that they simply will not accept the evidence that we produce to them, and they will not give a rational response or decision to what we have produced for them.
Have you experienced the FCA being reluctant to give clear answers to questions?
Absolutely correct. I have, as I said, written to Mark Stewart on a number of occasions, the last one asking 7 questions in there. He will not respond to any of them, and in fact it calls me rude for having the temerity of asking them in the first place.
What is your perception of the culture of the FCA, and what do you think of it?
The culture of the FCA, that'd be very difficult. I'd love to know. I mean, they say that they are there to regulate our industry. I find them obstructive in everything. I find that they won't consult in a meaningful way. I find that we as an industry are so scared of putting our head over the parapet on the basis that these people are likely to come and shut you down overnight. I mean, it's just, you mention the FCA to any IFA and they run away in sheer terror. That shouldn't be the case. We should be able to have a good dialogue and discussion with our regulators so that we can benefit not just the clients, but also the IFAs and the people that they regulate, because we are clients of theirs as well, and we should be able to expect the same protection from them that they and FOS give to our clients.
Have you ever complained officially about the FCA, and if so, what happened, Mark?
The answer is no, because I wouldn't know who to complain to other than through our APPG, where most certainly we have been very vocal in complaining about the FCA. Look, there's very little, Andy, that I can do sat here as an individual and in CIRAG, but there's an awful lot that we can and should be doing in our APPG, which are now part of yours. And You know, that's where it goes. We have got to look at ensuring that we do have a fairer regulatory system, one that will look at everything and be regulated by people who know what they're regulating and understand our industry, as opposed to being, as I say, civil servants who get wheeled in and wheeled out, as we can see from the the top end and the top echelon of the FCA, where there have been so many changes over the years. I mean, it's just absolutely crazy and ridiculous. Sorry, it's my phone, and I should have turned it off, and I will turn it off now.
That's okay.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And in your written submission, you make reference to Raj Parker. Would you like to elaborate on that particular aspect of your submission, please?
Yeah, I will do. It's very, very simple. Raj Parker, when we went for our second meeting at Endeavour Square, we were told that there was going to be this independent lessons learned review done by Raj Parker, to which we thought, that's great, but can you explain to us why you're only getting him to look up to 2015, which is when we first went to see him down in London? Why was it up to that date? Why wasn't it looking right through to the point where they had arranged this payout by capita? We couldn't get an answer from that. I couldn't get one from Raj Parker. But at the end of the day, the reason that I went to see him, because I didn't want to be duplicating everything that he was hearing from the likes of Mark Bishop, John Ravitch, and all the others. I went with this particular brief that I'd been given by John, and that was to make sure that I tried my level best to ensure that the IFAs who had been left out of the payment were paid. And I am still to this day fighting for that. So you can imagine that when Raj Parker's report came out, and it came out, guess what, on the same day as Lady Gloucester's one into the Bond affair. Hers was largely agreed to be a great bit of work, whereas his was almost completely ignored. And why was it ignored? Because, you know, he had basically not said anything in there that we'd all talked about. And what then made it even more upsetting to ourselves as IFAs is the fact that no sooner had he done the report than guess what? He's suddenly on the FCA's payroll from having been just done the reasons why. He's working for them, I think, 1.5 days a week or 1.5 days a month or something, but he's certainly on their payroll. And it smacks, Andy, yet again, of the fact that the FCA organised this payout from Capita, and guess what? 2 months later, the government are giving Capita a £36 million contract to help run the FSCS. I mean, you can't make this up. And that is what angers so many people about this. So Raj Parker, I don't have any time for. I thought when I met him, I liked him, but actually, as I say, totally ineffective.
Just for those that may not know, the FSCS, that's the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, yeah?
Correct.
Thank you. And FOS is the Financial Ombudsman Service?
Correct.
Thank you very much.
One of the 3 Fs.
And what do you think about the possibility of conflicts of interest issues at the FCA?
I don't believe there is a conflict of interest. I just believe that they simply don't understand and will not accept evidence when it is presented to them that they don't like. It's as simple as that.
Do you believe there should be spot checks by the FCA on regulated and or unregulated entities, perhaps similar to spot checks by VAT inspectors?
Yes, I have no hassle with that whatsoever. If we're doing our job correctly, Andy, then we should be able to accept the FCA coming into our offices, looking at our processes, and being happy with what we do. Let's just remind ourselves that the number of complaints that go into FOS each year amounts to just, I think, 1.5% of Gary Heath's report is to be taken on board. 1.5% of all of the complaints made are against IFAs. And so therefore, in my view, we're not the problem. So yeah, I'm more than happy, to come in. As I said, I was in the army. Good grief, we were used to inspections left, right, and centre there. And I'm quite happy for somebody to come in and say, well done, Mark, you're actually doing quite well, but I think you might be able to do this just a little bit better. But people don't think that way. People will say, they're going to come in, they're going to shut me down. Yeah, I can remember when I very first started on my own. Yeah, they came in and they looked at me and they had one thing to say. By the way, you've got the wrong logo on your fax header paper. That was the only feedback I had. Yeah, so no, I'm quite happy them coming. Quite happy.
And what positives are there about the FCA that you'd like to comment on?
At the moment, none.
That was your final question, Mark. Thank you very much indeed for taking time to not only submit your written evidence to the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Personal Banking and Fairer Financial Services, call for evidence about the FCA, but also for taking time with me today to provide this video interview as part of your submission. Mark Learmont, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
My very great pleasure. Thanks, Andy.